I want to talk a little bit about what an actual content outliner is and how it came about for myself. And so
Sure.
we've been working with clients for a number of years now for putting their podcast together. And one of the problems, and you're probably seeing like the problems we've covered on the podcast so far are problems that like our clients would always run into and we're trying to solve for them. And the biggest problems were like, I don't know how to make myself look good when I record. So we talk about a studio. They're like, I don't know what to talk about. So we help them do content planning. They're like, okay, when I hit the start record button, what do I say? And that's where the content outliner comes in, is we're going to show you how to put together what to say when you hit the start record button on your podcast. So the way the content outliner came about is I actually went through almost all of the major successful podcasts and a lot of the major successful YouTube channels and a lot of the successful like Facebook Live shows that were like really popular, and also a little bit of popular books. Welcome to PvP.fm, brought to you by Push Button Podcasts, your go-to resource for grabbing attention, building awareness, and creating authority in your marketplace. I'm Richard Matthews, your host and guide through the wonderful world of podcasting as a driver of business. Here, we teach how to use a multimedia podcast as the cornerstone of your omnipresent content marketing strategy. Whether you're an entrepreneur, podcaster, expert, or thought leader, you'll discover creative ways to leverage your digital content. From blogs to video, from YouTube to TikTok, and everything in between. I'll show you how to stand out from the noise so you can directly connect with potential customers, build strategic partnerships, and drive leads into your business. Get ready for actionable tips and tangible takeaways on improving your digital presence across the board. With that, let's dive into this week's episode of PvP.fm. Hello and welcome back to the PvP.fm podcast. I'm Richard Matthews, the founder of Push Button Podcast, and I've got Kevin on the line. Kevin, are you there?
I am here, Richard. I'm glad to be back. I'm excited to talk about
Awesome.
outlining some content and getting more and more stuff built.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin is my recording buddy for the moment. For we'll probably get more into this later into the show, but I think if you're running a successful podcast, having a recording buddy or a set of recording buddies, you'll see on this podcast we've got several. Kevin is one of them. Lucas Root is one of them. We've got several of my team members at Push Button Podcast who have agreed to come in and talk about their areas of expertise. So you'll see a lot of different recording buddies. Kevin's probably going to be one of our most regularly featured recording buddies because we got a lot of stuff we're working on together. Kevin, thank you again so much for coming on and joining us. We are talking today about the content outliner, which is what we do after we have created our content library, our like topic planning that we did in our last episode. And before we get too far into this, I know you actually got a hold of this content outliner a few days ago and started using it for your own show. And that was what we're doing here. Before we actually show everyone what it looks like and how this process works, why don't you give us your initial thoughts on what life before a content outliner and life after a content outliner, what that does for you?
So I've made videos before I got the content outliner, and there's some types of content I was really comfortable stepping into. But then when I started to try to do some of the less like super technical stuff, or when I was trying to be less visual, I started to really struggle. And the content outliner actually was totally the answer. I like that it broke it down into several sections. I like that it kept me from doing one of the things that I have done wrong, and I still do wrong because I'm a fairly rambly fellow. Anyways, it said, "Hey, don't do more than 3 of these. Don't do more than 7 of these." And so if I had more than 7 points, like, "Ooh, this is gonna turn out to be rambly. Let's see if I can get it back down to 4." And if I hit 6, then I was like, "You know what? That's probably about right. Maybe it'll be a longer video. Who cares?" And so I did about 3 pieces using it, and I was like, "Oh, wow, this really did make me better at what I'm doing." It's still rambly. It's not something I'm going to ever probably fix. It's part of my personality. I'm a little bit associative the way I put things together. And so, like, rabbit holes abound.
Yeah. And you know what? There's
But yeah,
people
no,
out
I
there who are going to listen
love
to your content, and that's exactly how they're going to need to hear it, is the way that you teach it. So that's not something to be terrible or upset about. I want to talk a little bit about what an actual content outliner is and how it came about for myself. And so
Sure.
we've been working with clients for a number of years now and for putting their podcast together. And one of the problems and you'll probably see like the problems that we've covered on the podcast so far are problems that like our clients would always run into and we're trying to solve for them. And the biggest problems were like, I don't know how to make myself look good when I record. So we talk about a studio. I don't know what to talk about. So we help them do content planning. They're like, okay, when I hit the start record button, what do I say? And that's where the content outliner comes in, is we're going to show you how to put together what to say when you hit the start record button on your podcast. So the way the content outliner came about is I actually went through almost all of the major successful podcasts and a lot of the major successful YouTube channels and a lot of the successful Facebook Live shows that were like really popular, and also a little bit of popular books like your E-Myth and other big books like 4 Hour Work Week, and looking at what is the structure for how people teach things, right? How do you take something that's a new concept and teach it to someone else in a way that they actually get it and understand it and keep their attention? And so the content outliner is like a reverse engineering of that into some important sections. So we're going to actually pull up the screen and show it to you, but what it is, it's the major sections of how to teach content or how to put content together. And what's interesting about them is the order that we're going to go through in the content outliner is not a set in stone order. It is these are the things that you have to hit in your podcast or in your video, but we have to teach them in an order and they have to be outlined in an order because that life is linear. But so as long as you hit those in your podcast at some point, the order can be mixed and matched. The order that it's in there is my most comfortable order. But it's not the order that you have to do it in. Some of the successful podcasts will have, we'll talk about this. Sometimes they'll talk about the how and then they'll talk about the why later, or sometimes they'll start with their calls to action at the beginning. But you can switch up the content as long as you're hitting all these major points throughout your show. And one of the like more common trends,
Yes.
like, go ahead.
I think if why you're doing something is important, you almost have to hit it before the how, or nobody or somebody they have to rewatch the how anyways because they're not going to be the same focused. So like that
Yeah,
was the thing. Like I thought about it afterwards. I'm like, you know what? I often used to miss the why. I just wouldn't give it. I do lots of how-to stuff. Uh, I'm 100% the E-Myth guy, right? I am a technician who had an entrepreneurial seizure. And in retrospect, and with 10 years of experience and having had a little bit of success, I will totally say I can now see that guy in me. I think the first time I read the book, I was like, maybe I am that guy. And
yeah,
this did fix that for me. Like I'm pretty good at the technical stuff. You want to, if I'm doing just how to on my area of expertise, I can make that video without feeling weird. The second I try to feel authoritative, that this really brought me forward. Because first it gives me the why. I follow the Hermosi advice and I no longer say, this is how you should do it. I say, this is how I did it. So anyways,
So my point on just the order of things is there's a couple of pieces that are the calls to action at the end. The calls to action are at the end of the document, but the calls
oh,
to action might actually be something that you put in the middle of your show. That's one of the trends that's happening now is a lot of times you'll see halfway through the show, they'll have a break for their calls to action or something like that, either for their
that makes sense.
advertising read or their other things. And so the trend is to move the calls to action closer into either the middle of the show or the beginning of the show, but they're at the end of this outliner. Just because they're at the end doesn't mean you have to put them at the end. You can put them where it makes most sense in your show, but they are pieces that should be a part of what you're doing. So if you're creating content, you should be driving
Oh
people into
yeah,
the sales
100%.
funnel.
Yeah.
So we're going to go over all of those things, but so that's where this came from and what it is. And what I want to talk about next is why doing this is an important exercise. So the first sort of piece for that is if you actually go through the process before you sit down and hit start record and you're like, hey, here's the things that we want to talk about, then you'll have a couple of things that are useful. One is you'll have talking points. So when you actually hit start record, you'll have something to look at and be like, oh, here's the things that I want to make sure I talk about. You won't forget things. I'm one of those people who will forget things, or like you said, go down a rabbit hole on one of my points and spend 45 minutes talking about that one thing and then forget what my next point was because I spent so long talking about the first point.
Yeah, so I find that having points too prevents you from tangenting a long way typically. I can
Yeah.
normally tell when I've gotten far enough away from my points that I need to just go back for the sake of the viewer.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's
Where
come back
without
to
point
what we were talking about today. And then the second reason why it's really important is because there's actually some psychology behind what is happening here. Like, why do all the successful shows have these sections? Right. And part of it is because you're talking to human beings, and human beings have what we call human psychology. We operate a certain way. And so you'll see in the content structure here, there's four main pieces that are really important. There's the what, the why, the how, and the now. And they are part of what we call the levels of awareness. And so what you're looking at for those levels of awareness is you're looking at, if you're going to teach someone something, they have a certain level of awareness for what that thing is. And so the biggest problem most people do when they're teaching something, and this comes from my career before as an instructional designer, is most people will teach the how and they'll leave off the other three parts. And so if you've ever been through a training where someone teaches you how to do something and you've walked away from that training going, well, that was interesting, but I don't really know what to do with it. It's because they didn't do the instructional design part of going through the rest of the levels of awareness, which is the what, the why, the how, and the now. And you see us do that on this podcast regularly. What are we talking about? We're talking about the content outliner. Why is the content outliner important? Here's some reasons that it's important. Here's how you use it, what it looks like. Here's examples for it. And then now is perspective stories, case study. And those kind of things really help you take a listener who might be in any sort of, because someone who's listening to your content, you don't get to decide how far into their journey they are. They might know nothing about what you're talking about, or they might be an expert, or they might be anywhere on that range. So when you go through the content, you need to make sure you're hitting all the pieces for someone, no matter where they are on the journey. So you can bring them all to the same place and then take them on the same journey with you. That's why like the what and the why are really important. And the how, when you start with just the how, if someone who is a beginner doesn't actually know what it is you're talking about, doesn't understand your terms, or they don't know why doing what you're doing is important, then they're not actually going to be able to understand what you're doing and take action on it. And in the same way, and someone who is already an expert, they might have preconceived notions about how they work with certain language or certain terminology. And your definitions might be slightly different. And that might be really important to your how-to. So when you start with, hey, here's what we're talking about, here's the definitional terms we're using, you bring them to the same page. So when you go through the how-to, they can understand your method of thinking and those kind of things. So no matter where they are at on that spectrum of knowing things about your topic, when you follow this structure, you're helping bring them to the same place so you can go on the same journey together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes 100% sense. And I've done lots of like training in general, for like video training. I've always found that I'm pretty okay at doing the why for individual steps. And then once I went through this, I realized, oh, jeepers, I never do the why for the overarching thing, which is funny because I intellectually know it exists, but it never occurred to me that's what I was missing.
So
Anyways,
those are
but the outliner made me realize all sorts of things about my old content where I'm like, I guess I'm going to be one of those guys who's like, my first videos suck.
and then you get
Whatever.
better at it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you get better at it. And
Yeah.
yeah, the second sort of thing that's important to note is that there's a few other sections, right? So we got the what, why, how, now, but then there's some things that
Yeah.
just make it useful for a podcast or a video. And those are like a hook. We'll talk about the hook,
Yeah.
and we're going to talk about an introduction or like a welcome sequence, and we're going to talk about your calls to action and stuff like that. And those are things that fit into that overall what, why, how, now structure. And so we'll see those. That's where I'm like, the what, why, how, now is essential. The other pieces are things that you're going to fit in because you're running a podcast and sharing content on the internet. And these are some of the things that are expected. And they might change as technology changes and as the way that we work with things changes. But right now we do audio podcasts, videos on YouTube, videos on social media, that kind of stuff. These are the pieces that make the most sense. That what, why, how, now, though, are your basic human psychology pieces of teaching someone how to do a thing or what you think about a thing, those kind of things. So
Yeah.
the last sort of note before we actually get into it is this document is meant to be a training tool, right? Where you actually go through and you might use this document 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 times where you actually work through and use the document. But what you're going to find out is that the document is really long, right? It's 10 pages long and it's just covering a few different points. You'll get to the point as you start getting good at this and using it that you don't need the document anymore. You can just pull out a 3x5 card or Apple Notes or whatever your favorite note taking app is. Be like, hey, I'm going to talk about this topic. Here's my hook. Here's my what. Here's my why. Here's my how. Here's my now. Here's my call to action. You got all your talking points ready to go on a 3x5 card. You don't need the document anymore.
Yeah, and
No.
I did, like I said, I went through it about 3 times, and basically by the 3rd time, I'd already just pulled out all the fill in the blank spots
Yeah.
because the document didn't matter. It just needed to write the fill in the blank spots seemed like the right amount of information to write down.
Yeah.
So,
So maybe at some point I should make a 1-page version of this. It's just here's the 1-page version. Once you're good
yeah,
at it, here's the expert
maybe you
version.
should add a printable worksheet for the last page.
Yeah, a printable worksheet for last page. This is the expert version of the content outliner. Is the once you've
Like
done this, go through it.
once you've gone through it once, this is the page you actually need, and it just has here's your bullet points, here's your bullet points, here's your and what is your call to
Uh,
action today, hard and soft.
So with that sort of covered, hopefully we've covered here's what content outliner is and here's why we think it's important, why I think it's important. Let's actually dive into it and show you what it looks like. And we
Yeah,
can
let's go.
talk through these pieces. For my video editors, the video has been sharing the whole time, hopefully. And if you see me looking off to the side, I've got it up on my second monitor. So that is where I'm going to be looking for a minute. This is the content outliner and it's a PDF document and it should be, depending on your PDF editor, you can actually click and type into these fields. but I like to print them out and write on them. That's my thought. Or I'll pull these up and
I'm also tactile. I also printed it out and wrote on it.
there you go. So depending on how you like to operate, or if I'm doing something else, sometimes I'll pull up like I'll have Google Drive and I'll be like, hey, here's my what, why, how now, and put the points in on a second thing and just have this up set sitting next to it. So you might use it a couple different ways. The first step here in the content outliner is your topic, right? So the topic comes from the content planning session we did. You have that whole Google spreadsheet of, hey, here's all the topics and here's the headlines that you want to talk about. You just drop your topic in at the top. Hey, this is the thing that we're talking about today. So in this video, it might have been, what's a content outliner and why is it important? Wait, maybe we come up with a better headline than that, but that's our topic is what's a content outliner, talk
Yeah.
about why it's important, how to use it. So that's your topic. And again, topic doesn't necessarily mean headline of your show. Your headline is going to be something that's going to be SEO optimized and it's going to be like useful for YouTube and hopefully get people to want to click on it. Your topic is the actual like thing that you're talking about today.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So
that's what you're actually talking about.
yeah. So like I said, the topic here might be content outliner, what it is, why it's important, how to use it. That's not really nobody's going to click on that headline on
Yeah, yeah, but the
on
title of the
YouTube.
video might be it's just 6 steps to a perfect video, 6 steps
Yeah,
to a
the 6
perfect
steps to a
podcast,
perfect
right?
video, right? And so your topic is not your headline. I want to make that clear. And my suggestion is take your outline and what you're going to talk about, or maybe even the transcript of your video once you've done it. Feed all that into something like ChatGPT or Claude and be like, hey, help me come up with good headlines for this. SEO optimized headlines for YouTube. That's a great way to get headlines for your show. But for this, the topic is, hey, here's what we're talking about today, what you actually want to cover. And it gives you a goalpost for did we succeed at accomplishing this thing? If someone goes through this content, have they learned the thing that I said they were going to learn? Have they learned how to outline content and use the content outline tool? And say, they didn't watch the video, they didn't know what it is, they didn't know how to use it. They watched the video, now they know how to use it. They can take this tool and go and use it in their own business. You've successfully accomplished that goal. That's what your topic is. It's your goalposts on either side that say, hey, this is what we're going to cover. Keeps you from going off the rails and talking about things that are not relevant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100% it does. No, and that's how I used it. And I think it does it's one of the best little mini documents I've ever played with for this specific task. I was really impressed.
Thank you. Took a lot of work to get to this point. So the first part is your hook,
I
right?
clearly a lot of effort to put into it. I know
A lot
you're
of
blushing
time
over
and
there because you feel all humble and weird about getting compliments, but no, seriously, man, I can tell your team put a ton of work into getting this down to just the important pieces.
yeah, and this just comes from we've got a lot of at bats, 250 plus of our own episodes, several
Yeah,
thousand of our clients' episodes that we've done this with, and we got a lot of experience with it. So we've got a lot of at bats to be able to be like, what are the things that are important and that come across every single. That's what this is. It's the distillation of just a lot of effort.
yeah.
So your first piece for your content, and this is the one piece where I would say the order is mandatory. You should always start off with your hook. No matter what else is going on in your life, always start with your hook. And your
What, you
hook
can't
is
put your hook at the end of the video?
you can't. You got to get someone's attention right at the beginning. So the hook is your first 10 to 15 seconds of your content. And the purpose is really to grab your listeners' attention and get them to stick around for the rest of what you have to say. So there's a formula here, and the formula is pretty simple. It's 2 steps, and it's just finish the sentence. Right. So the finish the sentence is today we're talking about what are we talking about? You just fill it in. Today we're talking about how to use the content outliner to create the perfect outline script for your podcast. Right. And so I've got an example in here. Right. Today we're talking about how to do screen recording on an iPad Pro. And there's a note there that says this is how to type content. And we'll get in later. There's different types of content that you might run through this type of an outliner. But for now, that's your first thing is, hey, today we're talking about topic, right? Insert topic here. And then the most important part and the thing that most people miss is the second half of that hook, which is so you can. And this forces you to think in terms of what's the benefit to the end user, right? So this is the reason you want them to stick around.
Yeah.
So today we're talking about how to use the content outliner so you can create the perfect content outline for your YouTube videos every single time in 10 minutes or less, right? Like it's forcing you to think in terms of benefits. So the example that we have on that is for the podcast is so you can easily share how-to information of business processes with your team to increase efficiency. When you put them together, that example is today we're talking about how to do screen recording on an iPad Pro. So you can easily share how-to information or business processes with your team to increase efficiency, right? So you have both what we're talking about and a benefit for the listen. Make sense so far?
100%. Yeah.
So with your sort of experience here, what's your like before and after how you used to do your starts or your hooks and just knowing this framework? Does that help at all? Has it changed anything about how you approach the beginning of your podcast?
I spent a lot of time on hooks when I was running my previous channel. So this is very similar. I like the so you can. I didn't always use the so you can a lot, but I actually think it probably does add a layer. I had a crazy rule that I had to state the podcast name and what I was going to display within 10 seconds because there's some like 2 years ago there was some like data from a bunch of really super popular channels that said most viewers are lost in 10 seconds. So I was running like whereas I feel this feels more natural. I think I've moved much more to the like content no content's too long, it's just too boring
Yeah.
side of the house as I've lived the experience. So I thought this was good. I like this so you can because I think everybody already gets the you want to jump in and tell them what you're going to do so they know they're in the right place. I think the giving a benefit right away is right because it does come back to so you can have a quarter inch drill bit is quite different than so you can make perfect quarter inch holes.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
You're
You
talking
think
in a
in
pure
terms.
benefit way if you're actually saying what the person wants, because that's what that so you can forces is it makes you say what they want to get out of it. But I
Yeah.
think that's
Force you to
important.
think in
I
terms
think
of the
lots of
benefit to
times
the
we do
listener.
have yeah, I think lots of times it's easy for really technical people to forget that the benefit is what they're there to watch you for.
Yeah.
And so what you are teaching might matter to you, but it might not matter to them, especially if you teach it as right. So you can set up the okay, I knew I was setting this up based on the title and what you told me first. Why do I care to do it though? So
Yeah.
I think that is important. I think this is a good I think if you haven't done a lot of hook work, if you haven't done any intros, if you're just starting, just follow this format until it's comfortable and then you can make it your own.
Yeah.
I
There's
think that's
other
how you have
ways
to
to
I
do
don't
hooks.
think there's any other way to
Yeah.
learn how to do hooks.
Yeah, there's other ways to do it. There's other formulas for hooks. This is just a good simple one that you can always use that will always work. And it's a good training thing before you want to start getting more creative. Once you learn the basics, then you can start playing and getting into other ways to hook people and get people to show up and pay attention. This works. So it's a good basic hook. Now, the second
Yeah.
step here is where we get into things that trends make an impact on where you might put this in your content. And we call it the welcome, or I call it the welcome in this document. But really, what this is just this is your intro sequence, the 10 to 30-second little. Hey, this is our show. This is your branding piece. And if you go back 10 years ago and 5 years ago, a lot of these things, podcasts, YouTube shows, it was the very next part of their content. And what you're seeing, the trend currently is a lot of times this is moving closer to the middle of the content, and that is just it's changing based on people's wanting to get into the content sooner and things like that. Sometimes I've even seen some popular shows where they're putting their like branding sequence at the end of the show. But there's still a lot of really popular shows. I watch several of them in crypto world and in tech world where they're like, hey, here's what we're talking about today. And they're like, roll that intro, right? And they roll out, a 10-second intro for what the show is. That's what this is. The purpose of your welcome sequence of your intro is to answer the question, who am I? What's this show about? Who's it for? And it gives you your first call to action to subscribe. Right. So you're letting people know that this is not a one-off video. This is part of something that's bigger that people might subscribe to, that people might want to show up for. And it's part of your audience building sort of tactics. Before I get too far into that, what are your sort of thoughts on that?
So I actually have noticed a trend for this to have gotten shorter also and then be sprinkled. So what you'll get is like they'll go through like probably the hook and the why portion of this sort of. And then you'll get like this welcome banner at like the 15% mark. And then they'll do the same welcome banner. So it's less of a welcome and just like a reminder you're listening to.
Yeah.
And they'll do it again at like the 50% mark, and then they'll do it again at the end. And it literally is about branding. And I've seen it in lots of places that where they're doing something more like that and putting it at the end or putting it in the middle. And you're right. It used to be like hook. And then sometimes these were obnoxiously long. And I think that's why they got to the point where your hook has to be 10 seconds. Your intro can't be more than 15 seconds. Right? Like it used to be like, it better be as tight as you can. I think I think the other thing that's made a lot of this push back is short form content, especially YouTube shorts, is 60 seconds. So this stuff all goes away.
It all
And
goes
so
away in
you
short.
want to have in the shorts, you don't do any of this stuff, right? You don't do any of the welcome stuff. You just get to the point because they just want the why or the how. And there's no time for anything else. You have 60 seconds. Go.
No,
Right. And
What's
even
interesting,
when you're clipping it out of something like this, obviously you aren't going to take the welcome out of this and make it a short. It'd be silly.
yeah. What's interesting is
um,
there's a lot of really
so
popular shows that still have these intros, and there's nothing wrong with them. And to your point you said earlier, there's no such
yeah,
thing as too long, only too boring. One of the shows my wife and I watch every single week is Sailing Zatara, and they're a traveling blog. They have a traveling podcast. They talk about their sailing stuff. They've got a 60-second intro, and their 60-second intro is the
yeah,
same one every week, and it's part of our favorite part of the show. They've got good music on it, and every year they change it up a little bit to show the aging of their children and their family and like that kind of stuff. But it's the same intro, and it's part of the brand and the experience of the show. And just like because you're creating episodic content, and like even on Netflix or any serialized fiction, any of those kind of things that you see, there's always that intro that's a part of the art and the experience of showing up. And so this is part of it. And all we're saying with the trends is it might not always be directly after the hook. It might be somewhere else, but it is going to be a part of your episodic sort of
yeah.
like experience of what you're creating for people. And they're going to recognize, hey, this is the show that
Uh,
I'm showing up for. This is the thing that I'm coming back for. This is really for your
yeah.
subscribers.
Again, I think mostly it's choose how to do it and be consistent about how you do it. If you put it at the beginning, keep it at the beginning. If you put it at the end, keep it at the end. I think this is just part of your branding and it should exist, but I don't think it really matters. I don't think you could say, here's the only way to do it and then be able to prove that without a ton of exceptions.
Yeah.
But you're
It's
right. Like
you should
I
have a
watch a
branding
couple
piece.
yeah, I watch a
Go
couple
ahead with you.
super long video podcasts that are like 3 hours almost every week. And their intros are also like they're 20, 30 seconds long right at the beginning every time. They give you exactly we're talking to, and then they give you a little clip of the guest they're talking to. And then you come back to the host and he says, I really blah, blah, blah. And then they run like this pre-recorded, it's the same one every time
Yeah. So
thing for 15 to
just
30
to go through
seconds.
a quick example on this one, and it just shows that you're answering those questions about, right? So welcome to the iPads for Pros show. I'm Richard Matthews, and on this show, we talk about how professionals can get more out of their iPads. So if you're a professional using an iPad in your everyday life, click that subscribe button so you can keep up with all of our tips and tricks, right? It's that short little, that's like maybe 15, 20 seconds, and you can have some animations and other things that just, maybe like clips from your podcast. You can have a video editor do that for you. We almost always pre-record a piece like this so that our video editors can just stick it in the middle of our content. You'll probably see we have one for the Push Button
Yeah.
podcast, and you'll see that at the beginning of these shows. And it's just part of our branding piece. And it's part of what's funny is the Hero Show. We're at like 230, 40 episodes at this point. If I ever forget or my editing team forgets to put the branding piece in there, I'll get comments be like, you forgot your intro. But it's part of the experience they're expecting. So it is, you are going
Well, and you did definitely pay good money for that intro. I like that intro. It is
that intro actually is
no,
my cell
I
phone.
remember thinking I wanted something like
It was because I
'cause
think the current
I
intro
like
has,
to do like comic thing.
yeah, I think right now I have it's like me getting ready for a podcast and it's like a hero suiting up. So I'm putting my
Mhm.
shirt on and doing my hair and putting my glasses on and setting the camera up. It's supposed to be like a suit up sequence, which is fun. And so people come to expect those things. So if you do a welcome wherever it is, you're going to have to come back to it right after wherever it comes in where you reintroduce topic. Remember to, hey, welcome back. Today we're talking about so and so. If you're doing a guest interview, you have that little intro at the beginning where you're like, hey, today we're talking to so and so. When it comes out after your pre-recorded thing, be like, hey, I'm on the line with Kevin Rundle today. We're talking about how to use content outliner. So you're just making sure you're reminding them of the topic you're going into. This is not a requirement. Depends on how your show is putting together, but it is something to think about. If you got a nice long intro sequence, or you got something that's happening, even if you're doing like you got mid-roll bumpers or you got commercials or something like that, it's always nice to have a reminder. Hey, here's where we were before we had that commercial break, or we had that intros or whatever is going on. Useful thing to think about.
I think what you gotta think about here is and that this would be from my perspective, because I don't do just how to in what I'm starting now, what I'm playing with doing for my new channel. I think it's good to come back because you can say, "Hey, we're coming back to talk about," instead of, "We're coming back to show you how." If it's all how-to videos, by the 3rd or 4th video, it's not like, "Oh, I need to be reminded I'm gonna be showed how." If it's all talking head interviews, right? If you're coming back to an interview, maybe you have to reintroduce the guest for 2 seconds, but I don't think it's
Yeah,
quite as important if your content's very consistent and it's always the same type and format.
yeah, the
But if
same
you
thing.
have 3 or different types of content, it is good to just keep it's basically just making sure you reinforce your hook.
Yeah, reinforce your hook if you're coming back on those kind of things. Again, this is an optional piece, but it is there to remind you, like, hey, if you're going through these things and you've got something that's going on, if it makes sense, bring people back to the same place so you know where you're going on. And then we get into the actual meat of the content. This is where your content starts to get really good. And if you paid attention so far, most of the time, you should be like within 30 to 45 seconds, you should be getting to this part. You can see hook, maybe you have a 30-second
Yes,
intro
I
right
think
into
if you
the
have
content.
45 seconds to this part, I think if you have 45 seconds to this part, you wanna see what you can do. I think you're
Yeah.
like, depending on the length of your content, obviously, if you got a 45-minute or an hour-long show, maybe 45 seconds doesn't matter. But if you're doing lots of, like, little 20 or 15-minute shows, think about what percentage of your show it took to get here because people lose interest quickly.
They do.
And I found
They
one of the
do.
best things I ever did was reduce my because I used to have a channel that was open source marketing dojo. I just showed open source tools and how to use them. And I got actually quite a bit of momentum with that channel. But one of the biggest things that made my drop off rate go away was I took out the bumper that had my logo come down. It was like, we're here to teach you open. It was like 15, 20 seconds long. I just made it boom, the logo showed up, and then it went back to me talking or screen sharing. And I
So
went from probably 30 to 40 seconds to like 7 to 25 seconds from the start of the video to the start of me actually talking about what you're gonna get to what you're gonna start doing. Like, it
so
was
this is one of those things
ridiculous how
that
many
is
people I lost in that first minute.
there's a lot of debate on this subject on how long it should take you to get to your content. Test it out with your show, right?
Yeah, test it out.
You're gonna be consistent. You're gonna show up. You're gonna record every single week. You're gonna get better at this. You're gonna see what people show up for and what they want, and you'll get better and better at it. The idea here again is just to show you these are the important parts of your show as sections. These things need to show up. How long they take, where they show up in your show. That's all up to play and to
Yeah.
iterate and improve.
Again, I think, yeah, you're right. It's all about testing. And again, there's no such thing as too long. I say these things, but I say them because they've been drilled into my head by a million people and from experience, but they
Yeah.
aren't
No
gospel.
such
They're
thing as
not
too
even real
long.
rules. Follow
Only
your
too
data,
boring.
follow your audience. Yeah.
Uh,
Are you ready to amplify your influence and stand out from the noise? Join Richard Matthews on pbp.fm as he explores the power of podcasting, social media, and strategic content to boost your reach. You'll discover the latest trends in video, audio, and influencer marketing, plus unlock insider tips to create binge-worthy content spotlighting you as a leader. With upbeat energy and clear, empowering advice, Richard guides publishers, experts, and entrepreneurs on starting a podcast, improving social strategy, and connecting with your perfect audience. Visit pbp.fm and book a podcast strategy session to start spreading your message today.
So this is the probably the most important section of your content after your hook is your why, right? So your hook is going to get them to pay attention. Your why is going to give them the reason to stay. And it answers the question, why is this topic important? And the purpose is really to engage your listener's heart. And you want to create that emotional buy-in, right? Because people make decisions with their emotions and they justify those decisions later with logic. And so because of that, we build our content in that manner where we dive in and we hit those emotions first. Because if you hit someone's emotions, then you can give them the data and their logic third. So that's what we do: emotions, data, logic. And that's what this why section is for. Is it helps you get the heart, because if you can get someone's heart, then they'll actually pay attention to the data, and then you're going to back it up at the end with that logic to give them the justification for change, because that's really what you're looking to do. If you're teaching someone how to do something, even if it's so simple as brushing your teeth every day, right? You got to get them bought in. And I can't remember who I was talking to the other day. They were talking about this. It was like, you only have to brush the teeth that you want to keep, or floss the teeth you want to keep, right? And it's that emotional, oh, that hits. And so if you can give someone those emotional reasons why they need to care about this topic, that's where you're going to get them to actually pay attention to whatever your actual content pieces are. The how section of your content you're going to get their attention with the reasons why they should pay attention. Does that make sense?
This makes me laugh because I was talking to somebody about sales stuff because he does a bit of sales training. He's a pretty good salesman. And he said to me, make them fall in love with it and then tell them the reason they bought it for their mother. Most people need to be able to validate this to other people they care about in their life. And if you can give them all the reasons to justify it, most of the time you've broken anything that's going to cause them socially to abandon your product. And it made me laugh. He's like, just make them love it. Once they love it, tell their mother why it was such a good idea to do it.
And that's where your emotional justification at the beginning and your logical justification at the end. That's really
Right.
going to help with your content. So this why section, the way I like to do these is have talking points, 1 to 3 at most, right? And we saw us do this in the show already. Why would you have a content outliner? And we had a couple of points, right? It helps you stay on topic. It helps you know what to say when you hit start record, and it helps you keep you within the goalpost, right? Those are like why. They're just reasons why you should do something. I generally, when I'm done with this document, I'll have just like 3 little bullet point sections, and I'll fill them in with here's some whys that I want to talk about. I got some examples here from the screen recording example we've been running through the whole time. Screen recording is a powerful tool for modern day professional. You
Yeah.
can use it to show clients or students how to do things quickly and easily, making learning faster and mistakes less frequent. And it's also really useful for sending tasks to employees and assistants. Those are a couple of just really simple. Here's some whys that you might want to know how to do screen recording on an iPad. So the why
So what I liked about this was that oh, yeah, you can finish the story. I'm interrupting you.
I was just saying the why
So what I
section
liked about
is
this is if I
really
had
useful.
more than 3 reasons why sorry, keep talking over each other. It's all you,
I think
man.
we have a bit of a delay. That's what's happening. All I was saying is the why section is a really useful thing, but it doesn't have to be long, right? You're just looking to hit a couple of emotional points that are like, hey, here's some things that are like why this is going to be help you in your career, in your life, in your whatever it is that you're talking.
Yeah. What I found with this, and this is what made me immediately fall in love probably with this thing, you gave me 1 to 3, and the first video I tried to make ended up with I'd written down like 5 things. I'm like, "You know what? This probably needs to be 2 videos." And that's what really was happening. If you have a bunch of whys, maybe you're overcomplicating what you're talking about this time. And so I think the same is true for the how-to. If you're past the number of and we're gonna get there in a second, so I'm not gonna push too hard on this. But I think if you hit that if you've got more than the number that's suggested here, think about, is this another video or do I need to make it more concise? Those are the 2 thoughts I had immediately, and I was like, "Man, I wish I'd thought to limit how many points I was allowed to have in the past."
And that limiting of
But
points is actually a really useful thing to think about too, because there's some psychology there, which I don't talk about in this document, but if people are interested in it, the human brain is actually only capable of holding between 7 and 9 individual things at any given time. Right. And so one of the things that's really interesting about language is the purpose of language, like why we have language, is because it allows us to take a huge idea and a whole bunch of stuff and cram it down into a single word. And that word then gives us like a mental framework to hold a bunch of data. And so words are the same kind of thing where we can have certain things and you can hold a lot of data in one sort of area. So what's interesting about talking points is if you have 15 talking points, if I recite them to you even 4 or 5 times in a row, you couldn't repeat them to me. But if I give you 3 talking points or 5 talking points and I go over them a few times in the course of the video, you'll be able to remember them because that's just the way the human brain is wired. Is weird. We do a really good job of remembering small amounts of data. And that it's one of the things
Mhm.
that makes us really potent communicators and really powerful in the world for creativity and learning all sorts of things is our ability to reduce things down to a certain number of topics. The other side of that is computers are really good at the other side, which is irreducibly complex, right? Where things are, a computer can hold all the data in the world, so they can do different things than we can. So when you're talking to human beings, which is what your content is for, you want to keep those sort of things in mind. And so if you're going to go through a what and a why and a how, your what is a single topic and your why is 1 to 3 and your how is going to be 3 to 7, you're at that max of what someone can hold in their head because they can hold up to maybe 9 things in their head at any given time. And so this gives you a really good framework to know, okay, if I'm getting more than this, you're just overfilling the cup and it's just going to spill out and they're not going to remember what you wanted them to talk about or what you wanted them to remember. This gives you a limits for, we talked about earlier, the goalposts. If you're inside the goalpost, you'll get someone to understand what you're trying to get across. With that, let's talk about the how. The how, your why leads into your how. And your how is your content where you deliver on the promise of your topic. And its purpose is to give the listener the data that they need to understand your topic. In our case, we're using right here, what we're doing is we're going through an example, like where we're showing you how to use something. And so there's a few different ways that you might do this. And there's how-to style content, there's wisdom style content, there's interview style content. There's probably a few others. These are the big ones. How-to style content is where you do a show and tell. You walk through the steps of how to accomplish a thing. You use bullet points. You use the bullet point section above. You just write out the steps. And so in our case, we're actually doing how-to. We're like how to use the content outliner, and we're showing you each of the sections of the how-to of the content outliner, how to use them. This is very meta, right? We're using the content outliner to show you how to use the content outliner. But anytime you're doing how-to stuff, you're going to be having steps, right? If you're going, a recipe is very how-to. It's like step one, measure your flour. Step two, put it in the whatever, right? Most people are familiar with how-to style content. Then you have your wisdom style content. And this is where you might be talking about, let me see if I can give an example for this. When we were talking about the studio, like how to set up a mini studio, we were talking about the psychological barriers to recording and things like that. We didn't actually go through how to set up a studio. We didn't show you where to put your cameras and where to put your lights and how to turn on your microphone. We didn't give you like how-to steps. What we were talking about is the wisdom behind having a setup ready to record place that's just easy for you to turn on and easy to use. And we covered several points in there. We're talking about, hey, here's why you want to do this, and here's how we talked about a lot of times wisdom, instead of being how to, it's going to be general criteria is what I like to call it. So your general criteria is, what does a good mini studio look like? And it's going to have a light, it's going to have a light, it's going to have camera, it's going to have microphone, it's going to have backdrop, 4 things, general criteria. If you were talking about, say, you do Linux computing, what does a good server box look like? And you're going to have, oh, look, my light's dying on me. The general criteria for a good Linux box might be, they have servers that are in this sort of range, and they have this number of hard drives, and they have this kind of Ethernet connection port, right? And they have these kind of things, and here's why those kind of things are important. And so your wisdom is not going to be, here's how you take the server box and stick it into a server rack and make sure you plug in all these things in this way. That's more how to. When you're talking wisdom content, you're giving someone that general criteria for what makes this topic.
Yeah. You're giving here's my lessons learned at a
Yeah.
higher level.
Yeah. So that's wisdom style content.
The one
And
piece
then,
of the one type of content that you don't have here that I think is important, especially if you're going to be talking about something that's a physical product, is awareness content. That was the only thought I had on this whole thing. And this is from a course I took a long time ago, and it was a content creation course. They said 20% of all your content should just be awareness, like awareness type content, where it was actually saying this thing actually exists, or people use this thing for this. And it was, they're really clear that it wasn't a commercial as much as it was like, it's, man, I don't have the words, but it basically was like, what you're doing is creating awareness in general of whatever you're talking about and why it's important, without actually doing any of the how to or wisdom side of it.
yeah,
Um,
awareness
it's
is
supposed
a
to be short
useful
and quick.
thing. A lot of people who don't, if you look at the levels of awareness for a problem, the largest number of people in any sort of that have any problem are going to be in that unaware category. They're not aware of the problem. And so if you
Right.
can help them become aware of the problem, you move them further along the path to actually making a change or a decision. And so you're right. That is a good
No,
type of content.
absolutely. Yeah, that's what they're saying. What you want to get them out of is uninformed optimism right into informed pessimism, so you can tell them that I've got optimism on the other side of the pile.
Absolutely.
That's what awareness is
So,
for.
and then the last style here is interview style content. That's what Kevin and I are doing. And Kevin, this is where you dive into a topic with a guest, and you use the bullet points here to either write out your interview questions if you have a guest expert, or to write out the points of conversation that you're going to have with your guest. Right? Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about these things in this order. Kevin and I are doing this kind of loosely because we know this content pretty well. But you have your points that you want to talk about and make sure you cover. And we're a little bit cheating here because this episode here we didn't have to take a lot of notes for, because the notes are literally written into the document for us. But that
The thing
is
is, like, when you fill out the questions for interview, you can send them to your guest, and especially if it's a guest that's not a recurring guest. So they have a chance to think about what you're going to ask them ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things for like our hero show, it's always an interview show. That's all we do. We just do the interview show. We don't do any wisdom content or how-to content. It's just the interview show. And so we have our set of story questions that we ask. And so we send all of those ahead of time to the customer, or not the customer, the guest. And so they have those questions like, hey, here's what we're going to ask you. And so they get a chance to review those things. And then we do the rest of the sections as just part of the show. We're like, hey, we're going to start off. Here's our introduction. And our introduction is, here's why you want to listen to this guest. And here's what their like useful, unique thing is, right? Whatever that is. And we follow the same kind of structure. We're just doing it where we're lifting up and talking about the guest and their story. That is the how section. Any thoughts on that before we get into just a very short, you can see I've got
No, I think, like I said, I thought this, again, you talked about the psychology, but I thought that section right there, when I realized, oh man, if I'm doing this, sticking to 7. If it was over 7, I was either had 2 videos or I was rambling was what happened in my head. You know what? That's a good point. If I'm not doing something specific for 7 things, even in how to, even if you've got a long how-to, like, you should be able to break it into 7 distinct parts and know that you're sticking within those parts at least.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about
It'll
that because
help
I have a
people
one of my most
it'll help people
popular
remember.
videos was a configuration video, and the first few times I tried to do it, it was long and it went everywhere because I kept giving every single edge case that had ever caught me over 5 years of working with it.
Yeah.
And this would have really tightened me up.
Yeah, and it really will help people remember the process too. So if they remember the process, they will be able to use it later. And then it also makes, if you keep to these kind of things, it's really nice to be able to take that transcript later and then give it to AI and be like, hey, can you turn this into, if it's a how-to thing, you turn it to an SOP and have those as, what do they call those, like gated content. We're like, hey, if you want to have the SOP for this process, put in your name and email address. So it gives you a good
Yeah.
call to action later because you were concise with
I
the
always
process.
did checklists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
checklist, things like that. So
Yeah.
if you're following this kind
You
of
could
stuff,
go to the
you'll have good
website and you can
checklists, you'll
download the
have good,
checklist to follow along.
yeah, you'll have good things that you can give away. Which brings us
Yeah.
to the now section. So your now is the next section of your content. And this portion is going to answer the question, what is my perspective or my experience with this topic? And the purpose here is to engage the listener's mind and give them that logical justification we talked about before. So you remember emotional justification is why, the data is your how, and then the logical justification is what they need to act on the data that they've just learned. So the way I like to tell people to think about this is the now section is if you're building a home, how is the data? And the nails, just like the data, alone, they're useless. So the now is like your hammer. It allows you to actually drive the data home and actually build something. And so that's where you don't want to skip this part. And the most important thing that I can point out here is this doesn't have to be its own unique section of your content. You can sprinkle in these stories, examples, case studies into your content as you're talking about it, or you can do it as its own unique section. It can be an either or, but we have to, I want to call it out individually because it's a really important thing to have as part of what you're doing. And so there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. You can have stories. Stories are really useful if you want to engage the listener's emotions and hammer home a lesson, right? So if you're telling a story, remember you're going to emphasize the senses. This is what it smelled, what it looked like, and what it felt like for someone. And the emotions really help the listener relate to the story. The difference between a story and a case study is a case study is the same kind of thing, but this one is designed not to be emotional. It's designed to be logical. Case studies are going to be data, data heavy on here was Kevin Rundle. And before he implemented this strategy, he had 100 listeners. And after he implemented this strategy, he had 200 listeners, right? It's that kind of thing where
Yeah.
the story might be before Kevin had this outliner tool, he struggled and cried every time he had to put an outline together. And after he had this outliner, he was happy and joyful every time he had to put together an outline, right? So you're focusing on different things, data versus emotions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
And then
Yeah, no,
examples,
and I
what I
yeah,
have here in the middle is literally, it's like examples. What we're doing here is an example. We're using the example all the way through all of our steps. We're showing you what these look. But if you were doing a content on here's what good Facebook ads look like, you talked about what's a Facebook ad and why Facebook ads important and how to put together a good Facebook ad. And then you get to your examples, be like, here's examples of good Facebook ads for this industry, and here's examples of bad Facebook ads for this industry, right? You're going to actually go in and do examples. Or if you're doing, like you talked about doing configuration, or you're doing a how-to thing, you might actually show someone how to do, set up a Linux server box. Here's the step-by-step process,
yeah,
screen record. We worked for a company that did bottling, and we would do how-tos on like, here's how to set up the labeling machine that's on the bottler. And so you like literally record the examples. Here's how to do the thing. So examples are really useful as well. And it's to drive home the points of your data, right? So in the how-to section, if you got 4 or 5 points, you might have one story or one case study that helps encapsulate all of it. Or you might have a small story or a small case study or a small example that goes with each step. What you're seeing us do here is just showing you examples of each step of this thing right in line with the content. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Yeah. So that's
yeah, I think
that's
that's
the now.
perfect.
And the now is one of the things that a lot of people who do this type of content, they miss this part. They either miss the why or they miss the now, or they miss both. But usually they're missing one of those two things. And if you get better at doing this part, remembering to always include the stories, examples, and case studies, and remembering to include the why, your content will be more impactful for your listeners, which is our goal.
I think I never did a now. I think sometimes I might have done a why, but I don't think I ever did a now, honestly. Because it sounds, especially because a lot of it was like, once I'd shown you, my thought was that you're going to take it out in the world and you're going to do the exact same thing you just showed, or you're going to watch along with me and do it while I do it. Because a lot of mine
Yeah.
was computer based, obviously.
So in the
So
you
I
can you
think I think that was something
yeah.
too that I had to reflect on. I'm like, I think I like that. I think I'm going to try to build it into my content.
Yeah, and if you look back at your old content, you could probably see how, hey, I was talking about, I'm going to forget some of these things, but like you're always use the lowest level of permissions possible. And you
Yeah,
can talk about
yeah,
why that's important. You can talk about how to do it, and you can talk about all those things. But when you get into that, would be a really good for an emotional story. I had this client once who didn't do this thing, and here's the problem that it caused, and here's what all the emotional stress and
yeah,
turmoil, all those things, and you can really drive that point home by sharing a story of something that happened. And it doesn't have to be a real story. You could use parables. Be like, imagine a scenario in which you did this thing and some bad actor came along, or you fired someone and they still had access and they had access to everything and they just destroyed your whole business. That's a thing that can happen. And so when you're
yeah,
talking about your topics, whatever the data is, you can give someone the why and you can give someone the how. But when you connect it to a story or you tell a story with a case study or something like that, you're going to get that logical justification in their head. We're like, okay, this is something that I need to actually implement because we're storyborn people.
yeah.
So that's where that perspective really comes in and helps people. The last section here, this is your
Yeah, I
call.
might actually, now that you suggested it, I might actually take some old content and go through this and see what actually hits this framework.
Yeah, that should be useful.
All
Last
right,
section,
calls
call
to
to action.
action.
Calls to action are these are things that, again, this order doesn't have to be at the end. They can be in the middle, they can be at the beginning. You can sprinkle them throughout multiple times. Calls to action are super important. And it's the reason why you're creating content in the first place is you're trying to build an audience and then take that audience and move them somewhere into your sales funnel of some purpose. Otherwise, what would the point of creating content be? So there's two types of calls to action. There's a hard call to action and a soft call to action. And so the hard call to action is your off platform action. And so the off platform action means that you're asking the listener or the watcher to take some sort of action that requires them to leave whatever platform they're engaging with you on. So if they're on YouTube and you say, hey, click the link in the comments below or in the description below, that action is going to take them off of YouTube and go somewhere else. If they're on Apple Podcasts, you're listening to you and they're in the gym, you're like, hey, text the word Kevin to 55442, right? That's taking them off of the podcast to another platform. And it's useful to move someone further into your sales funnel or to become a closer member of your tribe. And the purpose here is you're answering the question, what do my listeners do now that they've heard this information? So quick little example on this for our iPad training that we've been doing through this little thing is if you like this training on how to do screen recording iPads, then you might really love our 35-hour course on how to get the most out of your iPad. For details, go to www.somewebsite.com, right? Or if you were talking like earlier, we talked about having the checklists or having your step-by-steps. You were like, hey, if you really like this content, you'd probably really benefit from the checklist we put together to go along with it. Check that out here. Right. And so that's what a hard call to action is. It's something that's going to take someone from being just a subscriber or someone who's watching you into someone who's on your list that you can follow up with, that you can continue to build that relationship with. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, makes 100% sense.
So flip side,
You want
the
to
other one,
hit soft calls to action before we discuss it, or
yeah, let's hit both of them and then we can
yeah,
discuss them and why they're both important. So the soft call to action
yeah,
is your on platform action, meaning it's an action that the listener can take without leaving the platform where they're engaging with your content. And this answers the question, how do my listeners get more, right? If you like this content, you want more of it, here's what you can do. You should always end your episode with something like this. You can have it elsewhere in the content as well, but your last part of your episode should always have this soft call to action. Ask them to subscribe for more of this type of content. And you want to do this on every episode, right? You might not always have a hard call to action because you might not have something that goes along with your content. You should strive to always have something, like a universal sort of guide or checklist or something you can send someone to. But this one is semi-optional. This one is not optional. Otherwise, why are you doing the content? Always
yeah.
ask them to subscribe. You hear people do this on YouTube all the time. Smash that like button, right? Which I can't stand. I never tell people to smash the like button, but that's the idea. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're on YouTube, hit the like button. Let us know. You'll see more of this content. We put content out every week on these topics so they know what you're doing. So example on this one, hey, if you like today's episode, please hit the subscribe button. We release new episode every week to help busy professionals like you get the most out of their iPads and other technology. Thanks, and we'll see you in the next episode. It's a good way to just finish off your content and have a soft call to action. So those are the two call to action types. Important things to note, they can be anywhere in your content. You can have them in your intro. You can have them in your mid rolls. You should always have a soft call to action at the end. It's a good way to sign off. What are your sort of thoughts on this after going through it?
Okay, so calls to action has been something that has evolved over the course of many years for me. But one of the things that has been talked about lots, and the psychology agrees with this, that I love and I've been trying to be really cognizant of, is anytime you have a call to action, whether it's hard or soft, only one at that time. So the classic example of, oops, you did it wrong is my channel loves you. We like you. Like, subscribe, and comment below. You're asking them to do
Too many
three
things.
things.
Yeah.
So if you want them to smash the like button, say smash the like button. If you want them to subscribe to the channel and get more, ask them to subscribe to the channel. But do the whole hook thing though with your call to action is my opinion. So what do I want you to do? I want you to subscribe so you can hear more content like this and become more profitable.
Yeah.
I want you to hit that
Exactly.
like button so that I know this is the type of content you want me to make more of. I want you to comment so that we can have a discussion around whether my opinion even matters. I want you to go to my webpage so I can give you something for free that'll help you be more profitable. Right. So follow that hook, the 1, 2, so you can, I think. And don't say subscribe and then immediately tell them, or you can go to people aren't really good at getting lots of directions at once. So if you're going to ask them to do something, ask them to do one thing and then do it often, I think is the best practice from my perspective. But for sure, at the end of an episode, ask them to subscribe. And my opinion is the mid roll is also a perfect place to say, if you're still watching, you should probably subscribe because our content's like this and you're going to love it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So a
And
lot
I say that especially because if you're doing an interview, sometimes as your interview is closing up, and I've done this to the hero show too, I will be scrolling to see what I want to watch next, right? Ooh, I got 5 minutes left. And just doing pleasantries now, and I'm gone. And I never make it to whatever your outro is.
Yep. So one of the things that I like to make sure that I do is like we have these call to action in our intro, mid roll, outro, like pre-recorded things. So they always end up in the content, regardless of whether or not I remember to say them in the whatever the live recordings are. And once you've done that, you're at the end of the document. You're done. You've got all your pieces for your content outline. And what's really useful is once you've done this a few times, it's really easy to just do this really quickly on a 3x5 card or on a note before you get started. Or it's really easy to if you really know your content, you can just have an outline in your head, like, hey, here's the things that I want to talk about today. Or there's ways that you can use this, but take the time to go through this process a few times and actually just follow the structure. And then as you get better at it, you can start to really fit it to your style and fit it to what you want to do with your show. And it'll teach you what the important parts are. And once you know what the important parts are, then you can take that structure and fit it into how you want to show up, right? Into your brand and into your sort of like desire to tell stories, the way that you tell stories, that kind of stuff. Because the structure gives you freedom. And it's one of those things it's interesting to me. Because a lot of times people think structure is it's going to hold me back and it's going to keep me from doing things. But really what it does, it opens up your creativity. And I tell people all the time, creativity thrives with boundaries. And so what this does is it gives you boundaries for your show. And it will
So
make you be more creative. It'll make you have better content. It'll make you have more opportunities to share better content with the world. There's a lot of cool things that happen here. It's a useful tool. Definitely use it. I know, Kevin, you've been using it for a little while. So what are your sort of like final thoughts on this for our audience?
so I'm like I said, I sort of made like a sheet that just has the blanks because I don't need the examples. So that I could then kind of like I do 2 things with this sheet. I sort of fill it out on the paper and then I bumble around with it. And then I'll normally take a bunch of this to Chat GPT and actually have that sort of give me 5 talking points on this point or clarify, or what do you think I'm talking about based on this outline? And ask ChatGPT just to tell me what it thinks I'm actually trying to say. What I think, so I think the whole thing's great. I think the calls to action are important. I think if you're just getting started, my thought would be pre-record some that you can snip in good places for calls to action. Like Richard said about having the mid roll and the welcome and his outro all having them already. So I think what this really does is it gives you a structure and it gives you a structure that's been proven repeatedly. And like you'll find that it's similar to a lot of other ones out there. It's not like Richard has brilliantly come together with the most unique thing that the internet has ever seen and it's going to change everybody's life. But it is really, I've gotten less good ones from a paid course. So that's
And
just the way it is sometimes when people are really putting together stuff. And like you said, what this is really is it's because your clients need this thing and you guys have condensed all the lessons learned over 20,000 hours, right? 10 people working 2,000 hours a year for a few years. So that makes it really I really love it. I love the way that it comes together. I actually like the order. I think the only 2 things that I might play with order on are or I guess 3 things. The why, how, and now are the only things that really ever get order changed on. Calls to action, I don't think there's an order for them. I just think they should be sprinkled. And I guess some of this depends on your content too, right? That's the problem. Obviously, no shoe fits everyone. And so if your content's 6 minutes long, obviously you aren't going to be doing a hard call to action and a soft call to action plus 3 separate calls to action, right?
Yeah. Like all the way through.
Unless
The way
they
I like to
naturally
think-
fit in some
The
way.
way I like people to think about this, and this is a like an example for people to hold this data in their head, is if you are thinking of your content structure is like the layout of your house. Houses have doors and they have ceilings and they have bedrooms and they have kitchens and they have bathrooms and they have garages. Sometimes they don't always have a garage, right? You might not always have a hard call to action, but like you have certain things that are going to just always be there. If you don't have a door to get into your house, the house is useless, right? If you don't have windows, you're in a prison, you're not in a house, right? If you don't have a kitchen, you can't make food. All right. So there's like all houses have the same sort of structure. It might be laid out different, right? Sometimes your kitchen's at the front, sometimes your kitchen's upstairs, sometimes your kitchen's somewhere else, right? The layout might be different, but you're going to come in and you're going to put your own style. You're going to put your own paint on the walls. You're going to put your own furniture in the house. You're going to live your life there. So all this is, it's just the standard structure of, okay, these are the things that need to show up in your content if you're going to teach content well. And then you're going to come into this content and you're going to add your own life and your own color and your own personality and your own business acumen to this structure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's exactly. I think that's perfect. I think that's exactly what it's like. As long as
So-
you have a kitchen, a bathroom, and a room, it's a place you can live. But you do need the door. I forgot to say it, but right? But if there's no bathroom, it's gonna be hard to live there as a person.
Yeah. Just like human beings need bathrooms. Like, so then we can't escape biology, right? And same kind of thing. We can't escape the psychology of how humans learn things. And so hit these things, right? And in your topic, however you're going
Yeah,
to.
and I think that the truth is, because a lot of this is also, you're eventually going to find your voice. This isn't like a set in stone document. This is a living document. There's things that are going to change about it in reality. And as you find your own style, maybe this isn't even your thing at all. But until you're good at making the videos consistently, this has proved to work for lots of people in the past. So do it this way until you see some success and then tweak with it. I've been so bad in my life about taking a course or getting some coaching, following their plan for 7 seconds before I decide, you know what, I think I would do this would make it better. Like, I'm not even doing it as well as the guy who's teaching me how to do it yet. And I'm moving on.
Yeah.
And then when I don't have success, I say it doesn't work. And did I actually give it a fair shot? Probably not. The truth is, and this is old man Kevin talking. I say that jokingly as I'm closer to 50 these days than I am to 40s. But old man Kevin's, man, I've said lots of things didn't work where what wasn't actually working was Kevin. And so stick with it till you're at least as good as the guy teaching you. And then make a decision to change it. And that's just my thought on it. Right now, I think if you just follow this process and you follow this order, you're winning over anybody who's got no process and no system.
Yeah. And it helps you get over that blank page syndrome, right? You don't have to like, what am I talking about? Here's what to talk about. Just talk about these things.
Yeah.
That end, we're right about an hour and 10 minutes into this thing. I'm going to give you a
Yeah,
hard
yeah, that's what I was just going to mention the same.
like hard call to action here. If you like this document, it'll be in the show notes below. You can click the links that's with this episode wherever you're watching it, and you can download this document and use it yourself. And hopefully you learned something here, and we really appreciate you. And definitely come back and watch us in our next episode, which I don't think we have picked out our topic yet, so I'm not going to give you an open loop for that. But we'll be back next week, something new, continuing this discussion of how to make your strategic influence podcast a big part of growing your business. So again, thank you, Kevin, for coming on this discussion today, and look forward to seeing you next.
You're very welcome. And if you watch this far, you will like this document. Go check out the show notes.
Thanks for joining us this week on pbp.fm. Make sure to visit our website, pbp.fm, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating on Apple Podcasts. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. And if you'd like to get help building an omnipresent content marketing strategy with a podcast and you want help, you might want to book a podcast strategy session with us at pbp.fm. Just click the Book a Strategy Session button and book a time on our calendar. We look forward to speaking with you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.